From books to movies to RPG sessions, forests are a really common scenario in fantasy stories. And if you're here, you likely want to draw your own forest, but every time you tried it, your forest didn't look as alive and interesting as you wished for, or you ended up getting lost trying to add color and detail. But do not worry, because in this video, I'll show you step by step how to create interesting and beautiful forests. First things first, before you do anything, you need to decide what story you're gonna tell. Trust me, this will make the process way easier later. Just write 1 or 2 lines about what's happening in the scene and why it matters. Maybe it's just a happy group of travelers passing by, or a lost spirit trying to find the way home, or even just a tired adventurer resting on a giant tree. I kinda like this one. Okay, now how do we take something so chaotic and organic like a forest and arrange it into a composition? Well, first of all, we need to define our focal point, in this case the giant tree and adventure. Now let's divide our canvas into background, middle ground and foreground. This will make it easier to arrange the trees and it will give a better sense of depth to the image. Just remember that this division is just a guideline to help you positioning things, so don't put the trees in uniform lines. It will look weird. Now let's populate this forest. I like to start by adding some big shapes to be the trunks and foliage, then add some medium shapes to be the tree branches, and finally some small shapes to add some details. After adding those shapes, I like to use them as base to do a little bit of sketching. This can be especially helpful if you're having trouble placing the trees and keeping your sketch cohesive. Also, if you're starting with an interesting silhouette, it's way easier to construct on top of it and to end with an interesting illustration. And that applies to pretty much anything, not only trees and forests. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. Remember to check your references to add some variety, so your forest doesn't look too uniform. Trees can be pretty complex depending on how you paint them. However, you don't need to paint every single tree with the same level of detail. Keep in mind the reason why you're adding those details in the first place, and what story do they tell. Use the details to draw attention to your focal point. And remember that if something is really far away from the camera, unless you're an elf with +20 perception, you probably wouldn't notice anyway, so don't bother adding a ton of details in those areas, unless it's important for the story or unless it's something you want for your style. I really like to work on line art for more natural environments, because you can do some pretty sketchy and loose lines and it will still look great. And yeah, I really like to add small details and textures with line art on my pieces, but you don't need to do the same if it's not, your style. Okay, so you planned your composition, played with some shapes, did your line art, in the case you do line art, and now it's time to add some color to this piece. Adding color to a forest can be a little tricky, especially if you're doing a fantasy forest. You can get away with almost any colors, as long as you know the basics of color theory. And if I were to talk about color theory in this video, it would have 1 hour. So instead, I'll show you some tips and tricks to make your forest look more cinematic with atmospheric lighting. Okay, so when watching movies and series, have you ever noticed how common is it to have fog in the background? Or how bright some of the windows are? those things are not random. During the production, sometimes they literally add some big chunky lights and some artificial fog in the scene to create a better contrast between the focal point, which is usually a character or an object, and the background. And this is something I do in a lot of my illustrations, and you should too. It makes it look so much better. It's great. You can probably notice how much I zoom out when doing the colors. When I already did the basic colors and I'm trying to, set the mood for the scene, making the canvas really small really helps me, getting a general reading of the scene. So if I can read the mood in a very small canvas, that means it will work if the canvas is bigger. So that's also a pretty good tip. Okay, now I'm just adding some more textures and effects to give my illustration a more finished look. And if you want to learn how to do that, I suggest you go to this video. Oh, and a big shout out to everyone on Reddit who commented on my post and helped me write this video with your questions about what is the most difficult part when drawing forests. You guys really helped me and I really appreciate that. I really hope you guys found this helpful, and if you paint a background using these techniques, tag me on Twitter. I would love to see your forest. And I hope to see you in another adventure.